The conversation around you flows smoothly, and you're lost in the moment, savoring every bite of that meal you've been craving all week. But just as you're finishing up, the moment of panic sets in. You've forgotten your wallet. How can you possibly pay for the meal now? You feel your stomach drop, a knot of embarrassment tightening in your chest as you frantically check every pocket, every corner of your purse. Nothing. You search your phone to try and figure out a quick way to resolve this, but the waiter, who had been so friendly and attentive, stands beside you with an expression that seems a little too calm. "No problem," he says with a reassuring smile, as if it's happened 1,000 times before. But this time, something's different. You're about to find out exactly what. Stick around, because the last thing you expect is who he really is and what happens next. Now, let's pause here for a second. You've likely been in a similar situation, right? Maybe you've forgotten your wallet before, or you've experienced the dreaded panic when the check arrives and you're not sure how you're going to cover it. We've all been there in one way or another. It's human nature, and it's that universal sense of anxiety and vulnerability that connects us all. You've probably even wondered at some point how someone in the service industry might react if you couldn't pay. The judgment. The embarrassment. Or perhaps, just maybe, some unexpected kindness. But here's the thing. What if this time, there's no judgment, no awkwardness, just a twist of fate that flips everything on its head? Are you ready to find out who this waiter really is and how this seemingly awkward moment turns into something unforgettable? Stay with me. I'm not here to waste your time. I promise you're going to want to see how this unfolds. You might think this is just another simple story about a person who forgot their wallet, but trust me, you've never heard one quite like this. This story is going to make you question everything you think you know about service, kindness, and those chance encounters that can change the course of your life. So buckle up, because I'm about to take you on a journey that's packed with unexpected surprises, twists you won't see coming, and a conclusion that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. But before we go any further, let's get one thing straight. This isn't just about a wallet or a meal. This is about people. And more importantly, it's about the masks we wear. The waiter. He's just one part of this story. There's so much more to him than you could ever guess from just his role behind the counter. And the woman? Well, she's about to discover more than just her forgotten wallet. She's going to realize that the people we encounter every day, the ones we may overlook or take for granted, have lives, dreams, and stories that are far deeper than we could ever imagine. So here's the big question. What happens when you think you've lost everything and you're at your most vulnerable, only to find out that the person who could save you is someone who's been standing right in front of you all along? It's a scenario that forces us to rethink how we view the world around us, how we judge others, and how fate works in mysterious ways. Stick with me, because the next part is going to shock you. Now, let's rewind for a moment. The restaurant, cozy, intimate, with the kind of atmosphere that invites you to relax and lose track of time, is bustling with the usual dinner crowd. The laughter of friends, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation all blend together to create an atmosphere that feels almost magical. It's the kind of place where, if you're a regular, the staff knows you by name, and the food always tastes like it's made with love. It's the perfect spot for a quiet evening out, or perhaps a celebration of some sort. The kind of place that makes you forget about the stress of the day and lose yourself in the joy of a good meal. You walk in and immediately feel a sense of calm, as though everything's going to be all right, no matter what else is going on in the world. But what if, just beneath that surface, something completely unexpected is waiting for you? Something that will shift everything you thought you knew about this place. Now, let's talk about the key players in this story. On one side, you've got our protagonist, let's call her Sarah. She's the kind of person who tries to stay organized, who plans ahead, but, like everyone else, is human. Life happens. And on this particular evening, it happened in the form of a simple, yet crucial, oversight. She didn't mean to forget her wallet, it's just one of those things that can slip your mind. But when it does, it can send your heart racing. Sarah had been looking forward to a quiet night, a small escape from her routine, and yet, the moment she realizes what's happened, she feels the weight of embarrassment. How is she going to handle this? How is she going to face the waiter? And then, there's the waiter himself. His calm, composed, and exudes an air of confidence that makes Sarah feel slightly more at ease, even in her moment of panic. His smile is warm, his voice reassuring. But here's the thing you don't know yet, he's not just any waiter. He's not someone who's simply doing his job and going through the motions. No, he's the kind of person who has a story of his own, a story that, at this moment, no one around him knows. Not Sarah. Not the other customers. Not even the regulars who come in every night. He's playing a role, but beneath the surface, there's a lot more to him. And that's where things get really interesting. As the story progresses, Sarah and the waiter share an exchange that goes beyond just a simple transaction. They have a conversation that reveals more than either of them expected. It's not just about the forgotten wallet anymore. It's about something deeper, something much more meaningful. You'll begin to see how their lives intersect in ways neither could have predicted, and how one small act of kindness, or one simple choice, can send ripples through their lives in ways they can't even comprehend yet. So let me ask you, what do you think happens next? Do you think Sarah will walk out of the restaurant in embarrassment, leaving her meal unpaid? Or do you think the waiter will do something extraordinary, something that defies all expectations? What is it about this situation that's about to change their lives in ways neither of them could imagine? You've made it this far, stick with me, because the answer is just around the corner, and you won't believe what happens next. This isn't just about a meal or a wallet. This is a story that reminds us of the unexpected connections we make in life, the ones that seem trivial at first but later prove to be life-changing. Hold on tight, this story is about to take a turn, and it's going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people around you. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Keep watching to see how this unfolds and what happens when a forgotten wallet leads to something far greater than anyone ever expected. Sarah had been looking forward to this dinner for days, a small reprieve from her otherwise hectic life. Over the past few weeks, it seemed like everything had been piling up, work was overwhelming, her personal life felt like it was in a constant state of chaos, and the endless to-do lists that filled her phone made her feel like she was running on a never-ending treadmill. Her job at the marketing firm was demanding, always requiring her to stay on top of the latest trends, juggling clients who couldn't seem to make up their minds about what they wanted. Add to that the weight of personal issues, her recently broken-up relationship with someone she had been with for years. Sarah felt like she hadn't had a moment to truly breathe. Everything she had once taken for granted now seemed like a reminder of her loss. So, when her best friend suggested they meet for dinner at that little local restaurant, the idea was a lifeline. It wasn't just about food, it was about escaping from everything else, even if just for a few hours. Sarah needed a night where nothing else mattered except the comfort of familiar faces and the fleeting feeling of normalcy. But of course, she hadn't accounted for the one thing that would throw her entire evening off course. As Sarah walked into the restaurant, she noticed the soft glow of the ambient lighting, the intimate setting that had always made this place feel like a little hidden gem. It wasn't the type of place that drew large crowds, but rather, it attracted those who appreciated the art of good food and quiet conversation. She had come here before, on dates, with friends, and even by herself when she wanted to think things through. This was her sanctuary. But this evening was different, something felt off in the air, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the tension between her and her ex, still lingering like an unspoken ghost. Or perhaps it was the feeling that, despite the good food and company, she wasn't quite as okay as she had been pretending to be. She had hoped that the restaurant would provide some distraction, but it wasn't enough to take her mind off the strange unease that had been following her for days. It didn't help that the waiter, the one who had greeted her at the door, was already a figure she couldn't quite place. He wasn't just a random server. There was something about him, a familiarity she couldn't explain. Maybe it was his steady gaze, the way he seemed to take in every detail around him, as if absorbing the energy of the room. She didn't know him personally, but something about him seemed different from the usual waitstaff. He was composed, almost too composed, and his confidence made her wonder if there was more to him than met the eye. He seemed to recognize her as soon as she walked in, greeting her with an oddly warm smile, as if they had met before, though Sarah was sure she didn't know him. As the evening progressed, Sarah tried to relax. She tried to push the feeling of unease aside, burying herself in the food and the conversation with her friend, but every so often, her mind drifted back to the waiter. The way he was attentive, yet distant. The way he moved between tables with an air of control. The small things that seemed like coincidences, but somehow added up to more than they should have. Had he been watching her more closely than she realized? Had he known something about her that he wasn't letting on? And then came the moment of panic, the moment when Sarah reached for her wallet, only to realize it wasn't in her purse. Her stomach dropped. She checked again, this time more frantically, but it was no use. The wallet, the one thing that was supposed to ensure she could pay for the meal and leave with dignity intact, was nowhere to be found. Sarah felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her, her face flushed with the realization that she was now in a situation she could not easily get out of. The last thing she wanted was to cause a scene, to be one of those people who didn't have the money to pay. She tried to keep her cool. The waiter had already returned to her table, but this time, his smile seemed more knowing, almost like he was waiting for her to say something. For a second, she thought about trying to explain the situation, to apologize, to explain that she must have left her wallet at home, but something about the way he was standing there made her hesitate. His calmness was both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. Was this something he had dealt with before? Or was he trying to figure out what her next move would be? For a brief, almost imperceptible moment, their eyes locked, her uncertainty, his quiet confidence. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, trying to hold herself together. "I must have left my wallet at home. I'll run back to get it right now, I promise. I'm so embarrassed." The waiter didn't seem surprised. In fact, he appeared completely unfazed by the situation, as if he had anticipated this moment. "No worries," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "It happens. I'll take care of it." It wasn't the words themselves that caught her off guard, but the way he said them. There was a layer of certainty behind his tone, a level of authority that Sarah hadn't expected from someone working in a restaurant. And then came the question that made everything feel strange. "Don't worry about it," the waiter continued, his smile never wavering. "In fact, you don't need to leave at all." She blinked, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean? I can't just leave without paying." "That's not necessary," he said, a faint glint of something in his eyes. "You see, the thing is, I actually own this place." For a split second, Sarah thought she must have misheard him. The waiter, this calm, confident man who had been attending to her every need, was the owner of the restaurant. It didn't make sense. How could someone who seemed so grounded, so involved in the day-to-day operations, be the one pulling the strings behind the scenes? Could he have been watching her all evening? Was this part of some kind of test? What was really going on? The words hung in the air, unanswered, as Sarah's mind raced to process this new revelation. She didn't know whether to be shocked, embarrassed, or suspicious. Was he telling the truth? If he was, why hadn't he revealed this earlier? And why did he seem so certain of her discomfort? Something didn't sit right with her. Something felt off. But before she could voice her confusion, he spoke again, his voice calm, as if he had all the time in the world. "There's no need for concern," he said, almost as if reading her thoughts. "But if you'd like, I'd be happy to help you figure out a way to make this right." Sarah wasn't sure what to say. She didn't know if she was more surprised by his honesty or by the fact that he had so quickly and decisively stepped in to resolve her situation. Yet, as she stared into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than just a restaurant owner. Something about him, about the way he carried himself, seemed to hold a story that was waiting to be uncovered. Something dark, perhaps, that hadn't yet come to light. And with every passing second, the mystery surrounding the waiter, who he truly was, what he truly wanted, and why he had intervened in this particular moment only deepened. And that was when Sarah realized something she hadn't noticed before. The more she tried to understand him, the more she felt like she was losing control of the situation. She wasn't the one who had the answers anymore. It was him. Sarah sat there, trying to absorb the words that had just come from the waiter-turned-owner's mouth. "I actually own this place," he had said. The weight of his statement lingered in the air, making everything around her feel strange and foreign. The cool ambience of the restaurant, which had once been her safe haven, now felt suffocating. She couldn't shake the sensation that she was being drawn into something much larger than she had bargained for. The waiter, now revealed as the owner, seemed to be studying her, watching her with an unsettling sense of calm. But it wasn't just the revelation that unsettled her, it was the way he seemed to have anticipated her every move, every question, as if he had been waiting for this moment to unfold. The initial shock of his admission left her speechless, and for a moment, Sarah just stared at him, unsure of what to say next. She wanted to ask him how long he'd known that she was going to forget her wallet. She wanted to ask why he had been so calm, so composed, when she was clearly in distress. But before she could form another question, a sudden interruption broke her train of thought. The sound of a loud crash came from the back of the restaurant, a sound that echoed through the otherwise quiet space. The waiter's face flickered with a brief, almost imperceptible expression of concern before he quickly turned toward the source of the noise. He didn't say a word but gestured for Sarah to remain seated as he swiftly made his way toward the kitchen. Sarah, her curiosity piqued, watched him disappear into the back. She felt the growing tension in the room, but her mind couldn't quite shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the cozy restaurant. The other patrons, oblivious to the commotion, were still enjoying their meals, lost in their own worlds. But something about this place, about the way everything seemed to fit so perfectly, felt like a facade, like a carefully constructed illusion. Just as she was about to stand and follow the waiter, something strange happened. The hostess, a young woman Sarah had never seen before, appeared at her side. The hostess wasn't wearing the usual uniform, and her eyes flickered nervously as she leaned in close. "You might want to drop this whole thing," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of background chatter. "The owner, he's not someone you want to get involved with." Sarah froze, her heart racing. What did this woman mean? Was she warning her? She barely had time to process the words before the hostess straightened up, forcing a smile and walking briskly back to the front of the restaurant as if nothing had happened. Sarah, her mind spinning, felt a cold chill creep up her spine. Who was this woman? Why had she warned her like that? And what did she mean by the owner? He's not someone you want to get involved with? She tried to shake the feeling of unease. It had to be a mistake. Maybe the hostess was just another employee who had been given a little too much to drink or wasn't aware of what was actually going on. But the words stayed with her, gnawing at the back of her mind as she tried to focus on the situation at hand. The waiter, no, the owner, was still in the back, dealing with whatever had caused the disturbance. It felt like the perfect moment for Sarah to make her exit, to pretend nothing had happened and forget about everything that had taken place in the last hour. But she couldn't shake it. She had to know more. There was something about this place, about this man, that didn't sit right with her. As much as she tried to convince herself that everything was just fine, that there was no mystery to solve, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there were layers to this situation that she hadn't yet uncovered. Just as Sarah stood up to leave, she caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. In the corner of the room, tucked between the row of plants near the back exit, she noticed a briefcase, one she recognized. The same one that the waiter, or the owner, had carried in earlier when he had greeted her at the door. She was certain of it. It was the same briefcase, the one he had brought into the restaurant with him. She hadn't noticed it before, but now, something about the way it sat there in the corner made her uneasy. Without thinking, Sarah moved toward it. She didn't know why, but the urge to investigate, to find something, anything that would make sense of the situation was too strong to ignore. As she approached, she felt her heart racing in her chest. She reached for the briefcase, hesitated for just a moment, and then pulled it open. Inside, she found what seemed like a stack of old papers, but what caught her attention was a single, faded photograph. The picture was grainy, the edges curled from age, but there was no mistaking the faces staring back at her. The man she had seen only moments ago, the waiter-turned-owner, was standing in the middle of a group of people, but there was something strange about the photo. He wasn't smiling like the others. In fact, he looked cold, distant. And the most unsettling thing of all, the people standing around him weren't people she recognized. They were unfamiliar faces, faces that seemed to carry an air of secrecy, of knowing something they weren't telling. Before she could look any closer, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic flooded her body as she quickly shoved the photograph back into the briefcase and closed it. She turned just in time to see the waiter entering the room, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment. He didn't speak, but the weight of his gaze told her everything she needed to know. He knew. Her stomach dropped as she tried to act casually walking back to her seat. The tension between them was palpable, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. She had crossed a line, and now she could feel it. She didn't know who or what to trust anymore. The owner, the hostess, the photo, it was all becoming too much, and Sarah couldn't help but feel like she was spiraling deeper into something dark and dangerous. As she sat back down, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple case of a forgotten wallet. No, this was something far more sinister. The pieces were starting to come together, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth or if she'd be able to handle it once she uncovered it. The door to the kitchen opened, and the waiter-turned-owner reappeared, but he wasn't alone. A tall man in a suit stood beside him, his face expressionless. Sarah caught a glimpse of the man's cold, calculating eyes, and her gut instinct told her that this was no coincidence. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than her. It was bigger than the restaurant. And the more she tried to dig, the more she felt like she was becoming entangled in something she couldn't escape. Before Sarah could process what was happening, the tall man in the suit spoke in a voice that made her skin crawl. "I think it's time for you to leave, miss." And just like that, the room seemed to close in on her. Sarah's blood ran cold at the sound of the man's voice. The tall, dark-suited figure beside the waiter-turned-owner spoke with an air of finality, as if he knew exactly what she was about to do or what she had already done. The way he said it, so calmly, so assuredly, made her wonder if this was all part of a plan, something meticulously crafted and executed over time. She didn't move, but her mind was racing. She had crossed a line. There was no denying it now. Her heart hammered in her chest, every second of silence between them growing heavier. As she sat there frozen, the waiter, who had once seemed like an innocent, if enigmatic, figure, took a slow step toward her. His eyes never left hers, studying her like she was an equation he was trying to solve. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corners of his lips, but there was no warmth in it. He was no longer the helpful, calm server who had guided her through the evening. Now, he was someone else entirely, someone who seemed to be holding all the cards, and Sarah had no idea what game she was even playing. The man in the suit, still standing by the door, motioned with a barely there flick of his hand, signaling Sarah to leave. The words were clear. This was not an invitation. It was a demand. But before she could stand, her phone buzzed in her pocket, a brief distraction from the suffocating tension in the air. Her hand shook as she reached for it, desperate for anything that might offer her clarity. But as she unlocked the screen, her eyes widened in disbelief. It was a text from her older brother, Michael. The message was brief but unmistakable: "Stay away from that restaurant." "I know what's going on there." Sarah's stomach dropped. Michael had always been protective of her, but this was different. The last time they had spoken about anything serious was weeks ago, and she couldn't remember him ever warning her about anything this cryptic. She read the message again, feeling the weight of it sink into her bones. What did he know? What had he found out? And why was he telling her this now, at the exact moment she was tangled in a situation she couldn't escape from? She barely had time to process the message when another text followed immediately, this one even more chilling: "You need to get out now. They're not who you think they are." The words felt like a slap in the face. She stared at the screen, her heart racing. Who was Michael talking about? Who were they? And how did he know about the strange events unfolding right in front of her? Her mind spun, questions flooding her, but before she could respond, the waiter-turned-owner leaned down, his voice low and unsettling. "Did you really think you could just walk away from this, Sarah?" he asked, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're already in deeper than you realize. The sooner you understand that, the better." She didn't know what to say. Her thoughts were jumbled, conflicting, and she felt like she was being pulled in so many directions at once. She glanced down at her phone again, hoping for some clarity, but all she saw was Michael's cryptic messages and a whole new world of uncertainty that had opened up before her. She had thought she was just dealing with a forgotten wallet and a strange encounter at a restaurant, but now it was clear, there was so much more to this story, and Sarah was only scratching the surface. Her fingers trembled as she typed a quick response to Michael. "What do you mean? What's going on?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. She needed answers. She needed to understand what had brought her here, why the walls around her were closing in, and why this place felt like a trap she couldn't escape from. But as soon as she sent the message, a new wave of tension washed over her. The man in the suit, still standing by the door, stepped forward. He wasn't looking at her now, he was looking at the waiter, a subtle nod passing between them. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Sarah's breath catch. She knew something was about to happen. Something big. And then, just as quickly, the waiter turned on his heel and walked toward the back again, disappearing through the same door he had entered earlier. It was as if the entire atmosphere had shifted, as if the momentary standoff had never even happened. But Sarah knew better. She wasn't going to get out of here that easily. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, when she looked at the screen, it wasn't Michael's name that appeared. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. She opened the message, and it was a photo, grainy, dark, but unmistakably one of the pictures from the briefcase. It was the same group, the same man standing in the center, except this time, there was something else in the frame, a young woman standing to the side, looking directly at the camera. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized it was her. But how? How could it be her? She hadn't been there, hadn't been in that photo, and yet there she was, looking straight at the camera, her face just as familiar as it was in the reflection of the restaurant's dim lights. The message accompanying the photo was short, cryptic: "Stop looking. It's already too late." The ground beneath her seemed to shift. She had been told to stay away, warned by the mysterious hostess, threatened by the waiter-turned-owner, and now, she was receiving messages that didn't make sense. How was she connected to these people? How was she in that photo? And who was watching her so closely that they could send her evidence of a time and place she had no memory of? Sarah's hands were shaking now, her mind on the edge of panic. The photo in her phone seemed to mock her, challenging her to figure out what was going on before it was too late. But as she looked around the restaurant, everything seemed different. The familiar surroundings were now tainted with an overwhelming sense of dread, like a puzzle where every piece seemed to lead to more questions than answers. In the distance, the waiter-turned-owner reappeared, but this time, he was not alone. The man in the suit had returned, and there was another figure with them, someone Sarah hadn't seen before. The newcomer's face was obscured by a hood, but there was something about their presence that sent a chill down her spine. The trio moved with purpose, speaking in low tones, and Sarah realized that whatever they were planning, whatever was unfolding around her, was no longer just about her forgotten wallet. It was about something much bigger. Something darker. As they reached the back of the restaurant, Sarah caught sight of a door she hadn't noticed before. It was partially open, a faint light spilling from the crack. It beckoned her, but with it came the undeniable knowledge that if she went through that door, there would be no going back. The stakes were higher now. Everyone's motives were in question, and no one was who they seemed to be. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time, the screen was cracked, a single line of text glaring at her: "It's time to choose." Sarah's pulse raced as the cryptic message on her phone lingered in her mind. It's time to choose. Choose what? She had no idea, but one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear: she was no longer in control of her own life. The ominous figures moving in the shadows of the restaurant, the strange text from Michael, the photograph, each piece of the puzzle felt more like a trap, and she was falling deeper into it with every step. She stood frozen for a moment, the cold, sterile light above her flickering slightly, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The air was thick with tension, and the walls of the restaurant, which had once felt like a comfortable, familiar place, now seemed like they were closing in on her. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here any longer. But as she took a step toward the door, her phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. Without thinking, she answered it. The voice on the other end was low, distorted, almost like it was coming from a faraway place, but Sarah could hear the urgency in it. "Don't trust anyone. They're watching you. It's already started." The line went dead before she could speak, before she could even process the words. Her hands trembled as she lowered the phone, the echo of the voice reverberating in her ears. She wasn't sure who that was, but she knew it wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning, and it was the first time since all this started that she truly felt the weight of what she was up against. Her mind raced. Who was watching her? Was it the waiter? The man in the suit? Or was it someone else entirely? The possibilities seemed endless, and each one felt more horrifying than the last. In a haze, she reached for the door, but before she could turn the handle, a sudden sharp pain shot through her head like someone had plunged a needle into her skull. She gasped, her vision momentarily blurring as the room spun around her. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, but her body refused to cooperate, her legs giving way beneath her. She sank to the floor, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What was happening? Had they drugged her? Had she stumbled into a nightmare so tangled that there was no waking up from it? Her mind raced back to the photograph, to Michael's cryptic warnings, to the strange and unsettling feeling she had been ignoring all night. It wasn't just the restaurant. It wasn't just the waiter. It was everything. She was being watched. She had been followed from the moment she walked in, and now there was no escape. A sudden crash from the back of the restaurant jerked her out of her stupor. The door swung open, and through the haze of her vision, she saw him, the man in the suit. But he wasn't alone. There were two others with him, one of whom Sarah recognized as the strange, hooded figure from earlier. The realization hit her like a freight train. They were closing in on her. She wasn't going to make it out of here. Not without a fight, at least. In that moment, Sarah did something she never thought she'd have the strength to do. She stood up, despite her dizziness, despite the nagging pain that still pulsed through her skull. The sudden surge of adrenaline pushed her into motion, and before she could second-guess herself, she bolted for the exit. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get out. The world seemed to close in around her, every sound, every footstep louder than the last as she reached the door. But just as she was about to push through the heavy glass, something slammed against her side, knocking her to the floor. It was him, the waiter-turned-owner. His grip was iron, and his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach drop. She gasped for air, the fear consuming her as he pinned her down, his weight pressing against her chest. "I told you," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. "You should have left when you had the chance." She fought against his hold, every fiber of her being screaming to escape, but it felt useless. His hands were unyielding, his strength overpowering, and she could feel the walls of the restaurant closing in on her, suffocating her. But then, just as quickly, he released her. His grip loosened, and for a split second, Sarah thought she had imagined the whole thing. But when she looked up, the man in the suit was standing there, his gaze fixed firmly on her. "Get her out of here," he said, his voice low but commanding. Before Sarah could comprehend what was happening, the man in the suit reached down and helped her to her feet. But as soon as her legs were steady, the world seemed to tilt beneath her again. Her vision blurred, and she realized that the room wasn't spinning, it was moving. The walls were shifting, changing, like some twisted labyrinth that she couldn't escape from. They were taking her somewhere. But where? What was happening? She didn't have time to ask the questions that were burning in her chest. The man in the suit guided her through the back corridors, each step echoing in her ears as they moved deeper into the restaurant's hidden depths. She had been too distracted to notice it before, but now, the place seemed like an entirely different world. The walls were lined with old, faded photographs of people she didn't recognize, the air thick with the smell of something she couldn't place, something old, something decayed. And then, at the end of the hallway, there was a door. A heavy, wooden door, the kind you only saw in old movies or haunted houses. The man in the suit stopped just before it. "This is where you'll stay," he said, his tone almost apologetic, but there was nothing kind in his voice. "Until you learn to stop asking questions." The door creaked open, and Sarah was shoved inside. She stumbled, barely catching herself against the wall before she collapsed to the floor. She could hear the door close behind her, the sound of the lock sliding into place sending a wave of panic crashing over her. She was trapped. As she sat there in the dark, her thoughts began to race faster than she could process. She had been warned, by Michael, by the hostess, by the voices on the phone. But it was too late now. The pieces were all fitting together, and they weren't the pieces she wanted to see. Everything was a lie. Everyone was a stranger, a player in a game she didn't understand. What was this place? What were they hiding? And why was she involved? Her heart pounded in her chest, and she realized, with a sickening certainty, that her life was no longer her own. It had been taken from her the moment she stepped foot in this place. There was no going back now. Whatever they wanted, whatever they were doing, it had only just begun. And Sarah was going to have to face it head-on. Sarah sat on the cold, hard floor of the room, her head spinning as the door clicked shut behind her. She was alone now, or so she thought. The silence around her was suffocating, the only sound the frantic beating of her heart. Her mind was racing through everything that had led up to this moment, every decision, every warning, every strange encounter. And yet, none of it made sense. The pieces didn't fit, the clues were scattered in ways she couldn't understand, and now, she was trapped. But as she sat there, trying to make sense of everything, her thoughts kept circling back to Michael. His messages, his cryptic warnings, what had he meant when he said, "They're not who you think they are"? What was going on with him? She had always trusted Michael, always relied on him for support. He had always been the one who had her back, the one who could make everything seem like it would be okay. But now, his words seemed more like a betrayal than a warning. What had he known about this place? About the people here? And why had he kept it from her? It wasn't until she pulled herself up from the floor, her muscles stiff from being curled into a corner for too long, that she noticed something strange. Her phone, which had been dead for what felt like hours, buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, almost afraid of what she would see. But it wasn't Michael's name this time. It wasn't even a message from someone she recognized. The text that appeared on the screen was simple, but it made her blood run cold. "You should have listened to Michael. It's not too late, but you need to act fast." The words didn't make sense. Who was this? Who was sending her these messages, and how did they know what had been happening to her? But as Sarah stared at the screen, the pieces began to shift again. The photo, the warning, the strange behavior of the waiter-turned owner, it was all starting to feel like something she had seen before. Something she couldn't quite place, but that nagging feeling in her chest told her it wasn't coincidence. It was like a puzzle she had been trying to solve for days, but this one text had just unlocked a hidden piece. She tried calling Michael immediately, her finger trembling as she pressed his name into the screen. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Panic set in. Why wasn't he answering? Why wasn't he there to help her, to explain what was happening? She tried again, and again, but no answer. Her hands were shaking now, fear rising in her throat. She had no choice but to dig deeper, to follow the only lead she had. But as she stood, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Someone was coming. The door swung open suddenly, startling Sarah as a figure stepped inside. She braced herself, ready to face whatever came next. But when she looked up, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the man in the suit. It wasn't the waiter-turned-owner. It wasn't even someone she recognized. It was Michael. But he looked different. He wasn't the brother she knew, the one who had always been there for her, the one who'd shared everything with her. His face was hardened, his expression distant, like he had become someone entirely new. And when he spoke, his voice was cold, too cold to belong to the man who had always protected her. "You shouldn't have come here," Michael said, his eyes never meeting hers. "I didn't want you involved in this, but now it's too late." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Michael, what is going on? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me about all this?" Her voice was shaking, panic flooding her chest as she struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. This wasn't the brother she trusted. This wasn't the person who had always been by her side. He wasn't acting like the Michael she knew. He gave a dry, humorless laugh. "You think I didn't try to warn you? I tried to keep you away, but you're stubborn, Sarah. You always have been. Now you're too deep in it, and there's no turning back." Her mind was reeling, her thoughts tangled in confusion. Deep in what? What's going on here? What do you know about this place? About the people here? Michael's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but then he composed himself, his face shutting down again. "They've been watching you. Watching both of us, actually. You're not the first person they've brought here. And you won't be the last. Sarah's chest tightened. They've been watching you. The words felt like they were carved into her mind. Who was they? And why had Michael not told her the truth before? Why had he kept her in the dark, especially if he knew all along what was going on? As Michael moved closer, his expression darkened, the lines on his face deeper than she had ever seen them. This place is a trap, Sarah. And you've just stepped right into it. A chill ran down her spine. What trap? What are you talking about? Michael's gaze finally met hers, but there was no warmth in his eyes anymore. No brotherly affection. Only cold, calculating resolve. You're not the person you think you are. None of us are. But you're about to find out who you really are, whether you want to or not. The words hung in the air, thick with implication, and Sarah felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting, her whole world tilting on its axis. What did he mean? What was he hiding? Who was he really? The brother she had trusted her whole life, the one who had kept her safe, who had always been there for her, was now telling her that everything she thought she knew was a lie. And that was when it hit her. The photo. The one from the briefcase. The woman in it, it was her. But how? How could that be? How could she have been in that photo? She had never seen those people before, never been in that place, but the more she thought about it, the more it all clicked into place. The moment she'd walked into that restaurant, she hadn't just stumbled into some strange coincidence. This was her story, too. It was part of something bigger than her, something connected to her in ways she couldn't understand yet. Michael's voice broke through her thoughts. It's time for you to face the truth, Sarah. You've always wanted to know what was going on. Well, now you'll get your answer. But it's going to cost you more than you're ready to give. As the door clicked behind him, locking her in again, Sarah was left in the suffocating silence, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The mystery that had seemed so straightforward just hours ago, forgotten wallets, strange messages, a hidden truth, was now a tangled web of deception. And she had been at the center of it all along. You said. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind, every thought crashing into the next, each one more disturbing than the last. She was trapped, locked away in a dark room with the chilling revelation that her brother, Michael, wasn't who he seemed to be. But that wasn't even the worst part. No, the worst part was realizing that she wasn't even sure who she was anymore. The photo, the warnings, the strange coincidences, it all pointed to something bigger than her, something far more sinister. And now, it seemed like Michael had been hiding everything from her for years, manipulating her without her even knowing it. But why? What did he want from her? Why had he put her in the center of this mess? The silence in the room was oppressive, almost suffocating, but it gave Sarah no answers. Her phone sat in her hand, the screen cracked, the messages unread. She couldn't bring herself to check them anymore. What was the point? Every answer led to more questions, and the deeper she dug, the more tangled this whole nightmare became. She had thought she was just trying to get out of a simple misunderstanding, losing her wallet, running into a strange waiter, but now? Now, it felt like she was in a maze, with no way out. Then the knock on the door came. 3 quick raps, as if the person on the other side already knew she was there, knew what was coming. She had to know more. She had to understand what was going on. Who else is involved? Her voice cracked with the weight of the question. Who else is part of this? What is this all really about? Michael didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted to the door, as if he was checking for someone. Sarah followed his gaze, heart racing, wondering if there were more people watching her. Then, just as quickly, he turned back to her, his expression dark and resolute. You need to leave. Get out now. Go as far as you can, because the moment you stay, they'll come for you. And they won't stop until they get what they want. The warning sent a chill down her spine, but Sarah couldn't leave. Not now. She wasn't just running from the truth anymore. She had to face it. She needed to understand what was happening, or she would never be free. I'm not leaving, Michael. Not until you tell me everything. I need to know what's going on. You owe me that much. Michael's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. For a moment, it looked like he might snap, like he might say something that would tear them both apart. But then, his expression softened, and his eyes locked with hers. You really want to know? Fine. You want the truth. The truth is, they've been watching us for years. Watching me. Watching you. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Who? Who's been watching us? Michael closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if he couldn't bear to say the words. It's bigger than just the restaurant. Bigger than the people you think are involved. It's a network, Sarah. A global network. They've infiltrated everything. Politicians, businessmen, everyday people. You wouldn't even recognize half of them if you saw them standing right in front of you. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. The waiter-turned owner, the mysterious briefcase, the strange messages, those were just the surface, the tip of the iceberg. This wasn't some small-time conspiracy. This was a vast web of power and influence, reaching into every part of society. The implications were staggering. But why me? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Why is this happening to me? Michael's gaze hardened. Because you're connected. The woman in the photo, she's your mother. You've always known that, deep down, right? Her mind reeled. The woman in the photo. The one she had never recognized but somehow felt drawn to. Her mother. No, it couldn't be. Sarah had never known her mother, had never even known her name. She had always assumed she'd died when Sarah was too young to remember. But now, Michael was telling her that the woman who had been a mystery for so many years wasn't just some distant memory. She was the key to everything. Before Sarah could process his words, the door flew open with a crash, and another figure stepped into the room. This one was tall, imposing, and completely unfamiliar. Sarah froze, her heart hammering in her chest as the man locked eyes with her. You shouldn't be here, Sarah, the man said, his voice cold, calculating. You should have listened to Michael. But it's too late now. You're in this far deeper than you know. Michael's face hardened at the sight of the man, his eyes narrowing. What the hell are you doing here? The man didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward Sarah, his gaze never leaving hers. You're about to make a decision, Sarah. And I suggest you make it quickly. You've been given an ultimatum, but we both know you don't have much time left. The people who are after you, they don't care about your safety. They care about something much bigger. Something that will affect millions of lives. Sarah's head spun. It was like a whirlwind of threats, warnings, and hidden truths, each one more confusing than the last. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Michael? This stranger? The restaurant owner who had set this all in motion? Everything was a lie. Nothing was what it seemed. I won't let you destroy her, Michael growled, stepping in front of Sarah. Not like this. Not when she has no idea what she's up against. The stranger's lips curled into a smile, though there was no humor in it. Destroy her? No, Michael. This isn't about destruction. This is about control. And you've already lost it. Sarah's pulse raced as she realized the truth. This was the moment where everything would either collapse around her or she would break free. But she didn't know what the right choice was. Who could she trust? Everyone was lying to her. Everyone had an agenda, and she was caught in the crossfire. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. The danger was more real, the consequences more terrifying. And just as quickly as the tension built, it snapped, as the man pulled out something from his jacket, a small device, a flash of metal, and Sarah's stomach dropped. The room was closing in. They were getting to the point of no return. Choose, Sarah, the man said, his voice cold and final. You either join us, or you stay in the dark and let everything you've ever known fall apart. Her world was crumbling, and she was running out of time. The choice was hers. And it was one she knew would change everything. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as Sarah stood frozen, staring at the device in the man's hand. It gleamed in the dim light, a symbol of everything that had spiraled out of control in the last 48 hours. Her mind raced, trying to process the impossible situation she was in. The world she thought she knew, the people she thought she could trust, were all lies, all part of a much darker game she never even knew existed. Michael had warned her. This stranger had warned her. And now, it was clear, Her entire life, everything she believed in, was nothing but a pawn in a ruthless, global conspiracy that stretched further than she could possibly understand. The man with the device took a step closer, his eyes cold and unreadable. The tension in the room was unbearable. Sarah could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, the weight of the moment sinking in like a stone lodged deep in her chest. This was it. The moment where everything would either crumble or break open. There would be no turning back. She had been given an ultimatum, an impossible choice, and now, she had to make it. But even as she stood there, paralyzed by fear and confusion, she knew something else. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Michael, for all his faults, had made a choice. He had put himself in the line of fire to protect her, even if that meant keeping her in the dark. And now, despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, she wasn't going to walk away from this. Not without answers. Not without justice. Give it up, Sarah, the man said, his voice a low growl. There's no point in fighting. You don't even understand what you're up against. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just a small part of something much bigger. This has never been about you. This is bigger than your little life, bigger than your silly revenge fantasy. So stop pretending you have control, because you don't. The words hit like a slap to the face, but Sarah didn't flinch. She knew this was a game, a manipulation. Everything in her body screamed to run, to hide, to escape from this nightmare that seemed to swallow her whole. But deep down, there was something stronger than fear. It was anger. It was desperation. And it was the desire for closure, for the truth to come out no matter the cost. I don't care about your game, Sarah spat, her voice steady, though her hands shook. I'm done being a pawn. You can try to control me all you want, but I'm going to take you down. The stranger smirked, a twisted grin spreading across his face as he took another step forward. You think you have the power to stop this? You have no idea what you're dealing with. You can't stop what's already in motion. You can't stop them. Something in his voice, something in his words, made a sick realization claw its way into Sarah's mind. Them? Who are you talking about? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it felt like it shattered the silence in the room. Who is behind all of this? Who's pulling the strings? The man's grin faded. His eyes flickered with something that could have been fear, or maybe it was just frustration. But in that fleeting moment, Sarah saw the cracks. For all his threats, for all the power he seemed to hold, he was just as trapped as she was. You really want to know? He asked, his tone turning cold and bitter. He didn't wait for her to answer. You already know. You just don't want to believe it. He took another step forward, pulling the device from his jacket. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stand firm, even as the blood drained from her face. Michael, the man said, turning his gaze toward Sarah's brother, you know what this means. You know what you've done. You know who you've been working for. A flash of recognition crossed Michael's face, and Sarah's stomach churned. It was like a weight had just been lifted, a final piece of the puzzle slotting into place. Michael wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't some naive victim in this twisted game. He was just as much a part of it as the man standing before them. And whatever this was, whatever had been building beneath the surface, it wasn't something Michael could walk away from. It wasn't something he could escape. You're working with them, aren't you? Sarah whispered, the words barely making it past her lips. Her entire world was shattering around her, but she couldn't look away. She needed the truth. No matter how painful. Michael's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Sarah saw the truth in them. There was no more pretending. There was no more running. This was the end of the line. I'm sorry, Sarah, Michael said, his voice cracked with guilt. But there are bigger things at play here. Things I never thought I'd be a part of. But I had no choice. They gave me no choice. The realization hit like a ton of bricks, and Sarah's knees nearly buckled beneath her. Michael had been a part of this all along. He had never been the protector she thought he was. He had been working for the very people who had been pulling the strings from the beginning. The truth she had been chasing, the answers she so desperately needed, had always been hidden in front of her, locked behind the people she trusted the most. And now it was too late. The man with the device stepped forward, his intentions clear. You can't win this, Sarah. You can't stop what's coming. But you can join us. You can be part of the solution. Or you can watch everything you care about crumble. The pressure was suffocating, and Sarah's mind was racing. Her heart was beating out of control, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay grounded in the storm of chaos swirling around her. This wasn't the end, not yet. She had one last card to play. One last move to make. Suddenly, a flash of light filled the room, blinding them all for a moment. The man with the device froze, his expression momentarily confused. Before anyone could react, Michael moved faster than Sarah could process, and in a blur, he knocked the device from the stranger's hand. The room erupted into chaos. The stranger lunged toward Michael, but Michael was quicker, pushing him back with a force that made Sarah gasp. The fight was quick, brutal, and intense, with Sarah caught in the middle of it, unable to do anything but watch. But in the chaos, her eyes landed on something on the floor, the device. A decision had to be made. In that moment, everything she had learned, everything she had fought for, came down to this. She had the power to stop it. To shut it all down. And with a sudden surge of adrenaline, Sarah grabbed the device and slammed it against the floor, crushing it under her heel. The silence that followed was deafening. The man looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and rage, but it was too late. The damage was done. The conspiracy she had barely understood was exposed. And now, it would all come crumbling down. But as the stranger turned and fled, his footsteps echoing in the silence, Sarah realized one last, terrifying truth. This was far from over. The game had changed. The players had been revealed. But the war was just beginning. And Sarah was ready to fight. The aftermath was quieter than Sarah had ever imagined it would be. The destruction of the device had sent a ripple through the whole operation, but the true impact of what had happened was still unfolding. The rooms that once buzzed with tension now felt empty, as if the weight of everything had suddenly left them all suspended in time. Michael stood beside her, his body language more closed off than she had ever seen. He was a man who had lived in the shadows for too long, and now, as the pieces of the conspiracy fell apart around them, he was left standing with nothing but the consequences of his choices. Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but it wasn't as heavy as before. The truth had come out. The tangled web of lies, betrayal, and manipulation that had threatened to consume her had finally unraveled, and with it, the source of all her fears and confusion was exposed. But as she stood there, watching Michael with a distant look in his eyes, she realized that some things could never be fully fixed. The scars would remain, even if the physical threat had passed. The war for the truth, for control, for everything they had fought for, it wasn't over. It never would be. But Sarah had learned something in the darkest corners of this twisted story. You can never truly know the whole truth, and even when you do, it doesn't always lead to peace. "I'm sorry," Michael said quietly, his voice low, almost swallowed by the space between them. "For everything." Sarah didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what to say. Could she forgive him? Could she understand the choices he had made, even if they had led to such destruction? Part of her wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had hurt her, how much the lies had broken her trust. But another part of her understood. The stakes had been too high. He had been caught in a system far larger than either of them had ever anticipated, and now, the game was over. The people pulling the strings were no longer in control, but that didn't mean the danger had vanished. It had only shifted. And as much as Sarah wanted to walk away, as much as she yearned for peace, she knew that her role in this story wasn't finished. "Not yet. The damage is done, Michael," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "We can't go back to what we were before. But maybe we can find a way forward." They both stood there, the silence between them now filled with an understanding that hadn't been there before. The past would never disappear. There were too many secrets still buried beneath the surface, too many unanswered questions still lingering. But Sarah knew now that she had the power to shape her future, to carve a path that was hers alone. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would never be the life she had envisioned, free from fear and uncertainty. But it was her choice now. She didn't have to follow anyone's lead. And with that realization, a sense of freedom washed over her, though it was bittersweet. As the days passed, the The quiet aftermath of the conspiracy's collapse became evident. People who had once been at the heart of the operation were now on the run, their power fractured, their motives exposed. But the true orchestrators, the people at the very top, were still out there, lurking in the shadows. Sarah couldn't ignore that. She couldn't simply turn her back on the world that had nearly destroyed her. Her instincts told her that this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. One evening, as Sarah sat on the balcony, looking out over the city skyline, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar message. Her heart skipped a beat as she glanced at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize, a short, cryptic message. "It's not over. They're watching. Stay vigilant." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her hand shook as she put the phone down, the cool breeze brushing past her face. There it was again, the lingering sense of unease, the realization that nothing is ever truly as it seems. The conspiracy might have been exposed, but the true scope of it, the depths it reached, was still beyond her grasp. And as much as Sarah had hoped for peace, she couldn't escape the truth. Peace was an illusion. The fight for the truth never truly ended. As she stood up, looking out into the distance, she felt a presence behind her. Michael, standing there silently, waiting. He hadn't spoken in days, but now, his eyes met hers with an understanding that was almost painful. He was a man lost in his own remorse, but there was something else in his eyes now, something new, something driven by the same force that had led them both to this point. "We'll face it together," he said softly, as if reading her mind. Sarah turned away from the city, from the shadows that stretched far beyond the horizon, and nodded. There were no easy answers. There were no guarantees. But as the night stretched on, Sarah knew one thing for sure: the story wasn't over. And as much as she longed for closure, she knew she had to keep moving forward, even if that meant stepping back into the darkness, into a world of uncertainty and hidden truths. There would always be more to uncover, more to fight for. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah wasn't afraid. The end was never truly the end. It was just the beginning. And whatever came next, she would be ready.